This is the Vauxhall VX220, built between the year 2000 and the year 2006. And it owes its existence due to crash safety regulations. Now let me explain. In the year 2000, new crash safety standards were being implemented, which meant the Lotus Elise would not be allowed to be sold. And Lotus didn't have enough money to redevelop their Elise to meet those new regulations. So General Motors, who used to own Lotus, went to Lotus and said, we will give you the money to redevelop your Elise if you build one for us. And that's exactly what happened. And the Vauxhall VX220 was born. Now I'll be honest, this is not my first Vauxhall VX220. I owned one for a year and then sold it. I was quite disappointed with it at first. It wasn't what I expected. When I was growing up, I had a book. And when I say growing up, I mean early teenager. It was a supercar book. And in that book were many supercars that realistically most people are never going to be able to afford. And right at the back of that book was a page, and it said 2 alternatives if you can't afford a supercar. And one was the Vauxhall VX220 and the other was a Lotus Elise. And I thought to myself, maybe one day I'll get to own one of those cars. And when that day came, I jumped on it. The day I could afford and own a Vauxhall VX220, I went straight out and bought one. When I went to collect the car, I was very disappointed. The car wasn't quite what I expected it to be. It didn't drive quite as I expected it to drive, and well, using it was very hard. In fact, I sold it very quickly. When I say quickly, I put up with it for a year and I decided that's enough, and I moved on to a BMW Z4M. And now I'm going to tell you why. Now, to tell you why I sold it so quickly, I made a list in my defense. Headlights are rubbish. They rarely work. They're like candles. Osmosis, that basically means your paint draws in water. When that water freezes, it expands and flicks bits of your paint off. Luckily, this car doesn't suffer so bad with it. Some cars are worse than others. It's very loud at speed. Okay, I expected it to be like that, but not quite as loud as it was. Tub chassis, which is what made it loud, they do have their downsides. They may be rigid and give you good handling, but everything reverberates. When something hits the underside of the car, just a small stone, you wouldn't notice it in a regular car. You get this almighty boom and so, oh, what was that? Is something broken? No, you get used to it after a while. Heaters rarely work. I drove this car from Bath to Colchester when I picked it up, and I think the temperature was around about 5 degrees. I could not feel my hands or feet, not when I got home, but about 10 minutes into the journey, and that was a long drive. I really didn't appreciate that. No padding in the seats. No padding. So what used to happen is, as you're driving over bumpy roads, my skin would get caught between my spine and the hard rear seat, rub, and it would actually start to bleed. I'd get blood on my t-shirt after driving this for, I don't know, half an hour to an hour. Getting in and out is very hard. To be fair, not a problem. I'm really good at that now. ABS is damn right dangerous. Only one brand of front tyre exists if you want the standard front tyres, and they are rubbish. And that's why it didn't drive how I expected it to drive. It didn't brake or stop as quickly as I wanted it to. It would skid quite easily. ABS really wouldn't help, and it suffered from understeer because of those rubbish tyres. They leak water. Most of them leak water if you leave them out in the rain. The rear lights can fall out, especially if you stuff the boot, because the lugs for the rear lights are in the boot, and if you put too much in the boot, that puts pressure on them and they snap. They're not strong. I've sort of talked about the scary noises that this car can make when you hit even when the lightest of things hit the underside of the car. Can't open the doors when they're frozen. Well, that's a lovely one. If you wake up and it's frozen outside, go and open your car door. Nope, it won't. And without fail, the windscreen will fail, but the inside of windscreen will fail. The windscreen would freeze, and the inside of the windscreen would freeze as well. It seems that it always freezes on both sides. So frustrating. There's no leg room for the width. So yes, you've got the length. You think about length when you buy a car, but I've never had to think about width before. It goes against this gear knob, this center console here, and it starts to ache your leg a little bit here as you're always resting on it. And here it's like a hard edge. I've sorted it, it's padded now, but that used to hurt there as well. Your legs are together. You can't sort of open your legs a little bit for comfort. The tow eye turns to dust. So if you ever need to tow the car or put it on a flatbed, you may pull that bracket, the tow eye bracket turns to dust, through the front of your car, destroying your front clam. People have done that. Luckily, I did that before. Lucky I found out about that before it happened to me. And yes, my tow eye bracket, when I went to replace it with a stainless steel one, you didn't have to unbolt it. You could just pull it out. It literally rusted away. Seals crumble, yes. So if you get a passenger who doesn't know how to get in and out of it properly, and they put their weight, not on this black bit, but on this lower bit here you can't see, yeah, their knee will go through it. Thank you very much. Luckily, I've warned everyone when they get in and out how to get in and out. That's a pain in the backside in itself. But the first car I had when I bought it, it had a hole in the sill where someone had done that. Radiators fail. So if you go to get your car MOT'd and they don't know what they're doing with this car, they'll leave it idling to help it go through the emissions. And the plastic end caps of the radiators can just pop off because the fan isn't set to come in until 106 degrees Celsius, which is quite high. Galvanic corrosion, aluminium against steel, bad news. They're just generally poorly built. Things aren't solid. And when it comes to you taking things off, quite often you go to unscrew something and the screw or the nut or bolt just keeps turning because they've used poor materials when building it. This is the worst thing, and this is the thing you can't forgive it for. And a lot of these problems are not just for the Vauxhall VX220, they're for the Elise as well. They share a lot of the same problems. Hub carrier bolt snap and toe link snap. And when that happens, you could die because you lose control of the car. If your toe link snap at the back, your rear wheels can do this. You don't have control of which direction the car goes. And if you've got a lorry coming towards you, or there's a tree, and you hit something like that, I don't have to tell you more than that. Now, despite all those problems, and yeah, I could have missed some out there, I've tried my best to think of them all, but there may be some that I've forgotten about. I ended up back in one of these cars after just 3 months of having a BMW Z4M, and the M is the good one. It's the quick one. It's the one with the M3 engine, and that's because I missed it. There's something about this car that no other car gives you or has. It's quite unique and it's quite amazing. What happened is I managed to get a ride in a VX220 again, and I wasn't driving it, I was just in the passenger seat, and the way the thing steered, I could feel from the passenger seat how the car handled. I thought, this is what I'm missing from my BMW. This is what I want. So I sold the BMW, tried to buy back the car I sold, the VX220 I sold, however, that wasn't happening. So then I found this one in the Isle of Man with an ITB engine. I really wanted it silver because I love these in silver, and I did want ITBs, which are individual throttle bodies, but more on that one later. I decided all those problems I had, how bad can they be? The car gives me an experience that other cars just don't. Can't I solve those problems? And that's exactly what I did. I set out a goal to solve all those problems with the VX220 that I didn't like. I made the seats comfortable, I made the heater work, I made the lights good, I spent probably around £10,000 on the car to get it how it is. And to be honest now, it is good. It doesn't have those flaws anymore. Okay, I can't solve everything. The inside of the windscreen still freezes, and the car does suffer a little bit from osmosis. There's not a lot I can do about that. But as I say, luckily with this car, it only gets it a little bit on the doors. The paintwork only needs redoing every so often on the doors. Everywhere else seems to be fine. And having owned it for 4.5 years, getting in and out is really easy now. My girlfriend finds it very easy as well. But that brings me on to another problem with the car. I can only really drive it nicely with myself or my girlfriend. If I drive it with, say, a male friend who's slightly bigger, there was one of those noises, I don't know if that came along on camera, you're always elbowing them, because where your gear change space is actually over the passenger seat. So if you want to change the second gear, you elbow someone in the stomach unless they're very small. Just before I tell you about how this car drives, and I'll do some head cam as well so you can see what it's like from the driver's perspective, I want to tell you about the features of this car. Well, you get a heater, which as I said doesn't work most of the time. You get a radio, which because the car is fiberglass doesn't really get much reception, and that's an optional extra. Not all cars got that. And you get a roof that you can take off. You have clips on both sides and these two things in the middle. It doesn't take too long once you know how. What else do you get? Windows that you can open manually. That's it. So this is why I love the car. Just getting in it, turning that key and pressing the button. I already feel a little bit excited. I don't really know why, but something about it that does make me feel excited. It's a nice E46 BMW coming past me here. Time to get going. It's a very easy car to place on the road. Pedals are good, easy to rev match. Okay, the sound of this car is not normal. It's not a standard engine. The standard VX220, the engine leaves much to be desired. It's not my cup of tea. I actually went from an MR2 with a ZZFE engine to the ZZ or Z2 to SE. I'm not very good with all these. Basically, the 2.2 in the Vauxhall VX220 doesn't have any character. It revs to about 6,500, doesn't particularly make a nice sound. It's reliable, but it doesn't pull very progressively. It's a bit rough. Whereas this engine has been, I was going to say breathed upon, but it's a little bit more than breathed upon. It's practically a race-tuned engine. I have to be careful of my speed because it will go over the speed limit very quickly. You can hear how quickly it revs when I rev match. That's because it doesn't have balancer shafts and it's a lightweight flywheel, so revs like a motorbike. Makes rev matching very easy. Just in the village now, 30 zone. So I'll tell you about the handling of it. It's a very stiff car. The chassis is very stiff. It has a slightly longer wheelbase than the Lotus Elise and a slightly wider rear track, which really works for it because it means they can put softer suspension on it. When you have a stiff chassis, you can have softer suspension. So it's actually really quite comfortable. And you know what? I think this is more comfortable in terms of how bumpy the road is to the brand new MX-5 that I currently have. It's quite remarkable how well this car rides. Lotus really know how to set up a chassis. You get such a good view out. It's quite a low window, and the pivot point's in the center of the car, so the whole car pivots round you. You can get a turbo version with 50 more horsepower than the standard VX220. The standard normally aspirated VX220 gets 145 horsepower, and the turbo gets about 195. This has no turbo. Yeah, it has closer to 220 horsepower. Yes, 220. 870 kilos. You can get a bit slippery when you find a slippery surface, but all cars can. What I love about this car and this engine as well is that I can enjoy it at road speeds. I don't have to go fast, yet it can go fast as well, because it makes its best sound between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM. You get this real kind of like that sound. If I rev it all the way around to 7,800 RPM, it just starts to scream, and I'm not as much of a fan of that noise. Hear that sound? That glorious. That's what individual throttle bodies are. Well, that's not what they are, but that's the sound they give you. And it's a sound I very much like. It makes the motor car, the sports motor car, come alive for me. I'm not a fan of the turbo whooshes and whistles. That kind of reminds me a little bit of a bus when it puts its brakes on. Psst, those noises. I like a. That's how I like an engine to sound. Now I'm in the fortunate position at the moment where I can drive both this and the new MX-5 2 litre back to back. And they're very different cars, but they serve a very similar purpose: fun. They achieve their fun in different ways. This car is more accurate, it's more purposeful, whereas the MX-5 is far less accurate. It's not as precise, but it's just as much fun by being playful. If you're on the limit of control in this car, you're in big danger of going over that limit and not being able to get it back, because it's not a forgiving car. However, if you're in the MX-5, you can go well beyond the limits of that car, and it's no problem at all. It's very easy to handle, it's very progressive, it's very friendly. When this car loses traction, you need to be on it. You need to be like lightning fast to catch it, because it doesn't have much steering lock. You can't, the turning circle of this car is huge. So if you start to go sideways and you try to do opposite lock, there isn't a lot of opposite lock you can give. Whereas in the Mazda, very easy to control that. The gas pedal in the Mazda is better. The brake pedal in the Mazda is better, except the brakes in this are better. So this will stop you more times from a high speed than the Mazda will, but the Mazda's pedal is easier to use. The clutch in this is better though. The clutch in this wins out over the Mazda. This is the nicest clutch I have ever felt. It's completely linear. It doesn't get springy at the top. It's not heavy. It's really, really easy to use. The gears, of course, are better in the Mazda. The gearbox in this isn't particularly a good one, but it is very robust. And the handbrake is nicer as well. It's easy to use. It's a bit awkward to use this one. Getting it down, it's quite hard sometimes to get it down without it staying on a little bit. It's a bit awkward. Steering, okay, now this wins without doubt. But there's nothing else that steers like this, which is what brings me back to this car. And I have to choose. There's a Mazda right now. Yeah. I have to choose between this car and the Mazda. At the moment, I'm swaying towards the Mazda simply because I fancy something with some features, a bit more luxury when I drive it further, and for my other half, because I drive her around in this thing and she never complains yet I know she doesn't like it, and I think she deserves a little bit better. But I'm also quite aware and quite worried that when I do sell this, I'm going to want it back again, and I'm going to end up selling the Mazda and trying to get my hands on this. And what I'm afraid of is I won't be able to get it. This is the car I've fixed. I've made it work. I've solved the problems. It's taken me 4 years to get round to doing all of them. And the time over lockdown really did help me finally get to the bottom of everything. So if I wanted it, it would have to be this one. And I'm not so sure if the new owner of it would let me have it back. But I am hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping I will sell this. I will enjoy the Mazda, love the Mazda for what it is, that MX-5, and not look back. Only time will tell. And I think age is helping as well. I am getting gradually older. I'm not old yet, but I'm getting older. And yeah, this is getting a little bit raw for me. And I just feel like something a little bit easier to use and to have fun with. I am not interested in lap times. I am not interested in 0 to 60, which by the way, in the standard VX220 is about 5.6 seconds, and in the turbo variant, it's 4.7. This is closer to 4. The Mazda MX-5 is 6.5 in that 184 PS 2 litre, guys. I just want to have fun, and I want to be able to get in a car when I'm not working, at the weekend or even at the evening, and get that little bit of excitement when I turn the engine on that this is something a bit special. I'm about to enjoy myself. Now, although I spent 5 minutes rambling on about this car's faults, it's a cheap car to run. It's not a cheap car to buy because it's rare, and therefore it commands a premium when you buy it, but you don't lose that money. You get it back when you sell it. But the things that do go wrong with it are fairly cheap to put right, and if you can put up with it, you don't need to put it right. The engines are very reliable, the gearboxes are very reliable, and suspension is very reliable. The mechanicals don't really go wrong, but the engine mounts can fail, the header tanks can fail, but they're old now and they're not expensive to fix. The normally aspirated engine does have a cam chain, and you may be thinking, oh great, cam chain, I don't have to replace those, but do. They do fail. They do last a long time. They'll go 10 years. 8 years is playing it extra safe. But if you think you're going to buy a 20-year-old car with a 20-year-old cam chain and think you don't have to replace it, you've got another thing coming. You're going to have problems. It still has a tensioner and guides which are made of plastic, and chains do stretch. And I do know people who have had this engine where the cam chain has failed, and I know many people have had cam chains failed. It's one of the reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of cam chains. They're not really any different to cam belts, because a cam chain costs more when you replace it. A cam belt costs less. A cam belt you have to replace more often, therefore the cost ends up being about the same, maybe slightly cheaper for the cam chain. But what I don't like about cam chains is you believe you don't have to replace them, so people don't, then they fail, and that kills a perfectly healthy car. The looks of this car, well, it divides opinion. Most people I know don't like the look of this car, and when I show them the Mazda, they think the Mazda looks a lot better, the Mazda MX-5. In fact, when I was telling one of my closest friends about my conundrum, which one do I sell, he goes, well, the Mazda obviously looks better. And I was just like, oh, hang on a minute, that's not what I think, but there you go. Most people, in my experience, think this isn't much of a looker. What do you think? I'd be interested in your comments. Leave a comment whether you think this car looks good. Personally, it's kind of 50-50 for me over this and the Mazda. The Mazda looks better quality, that's for sure. It's got better shut lines, whereas this looks more dramatic, has a more dramatic stance, and you probably can't see it in a photo, but it's quite a small car. It's quite low and wide. It has the air vents, and everything is purposeful, which I love about it. There's no fakery on it. You need all the vents it's got. In fact, you could do with a few more, to aid cooling. I mean, not for it to run, but if it had a bit better cooling, it probably would give you a bit more power when you tuned it. So there we have it. Why the Vauxhall VX220 / Lotus Elise, because they are very similar, although they do have their differences, are both one of the greatest, yet one of the worst cars you can own. If you're used to motorbikes, yeah, no problem. But if you're used to cars built after the year 2000, you're going to be in for a bit of a shock. But you'll have an awful lot of fun at the same time. If you think the video is good, give it a like. If you want to get my future videos, please subscribe. I normally do driving instructor videos because that's my profession. But I am a car enthusiast, so I'll do the odd car review for my own good really, more than the views of the channel. Until the next one, cheerio.